please welcome to the stage Charles Blow.
Hello. Tonight, we will be discussing bringing advocacy to the big leagues about the role of player advocacy in professional sports. And I am joined by a stellar lineup. First, we have Liz Shuler, president of the AFL-CIO. Jessica Berman, commissioner of the National Women's Soccer League. And Carl Nassib, a former NFL player, tech founder, and philanthropist. So this episode is about players' voices. So I'm going to start with you, Carl, because you were a player. You played over 100 games in the NFL. What was one of the most impactful things in the vein of player advocacy or advocacy for players that you witnessed while you were in the league, either for yourself or for your other players?
Great question. Yeah, I'm Carl. I played 7 years in the league, and I'm really happy to be on this panel with you guys. The thing that I really appreciated that was kind of a combination of both players, the league, and fans was the advocacy around brain health and concussions. When I was in college and high school, people thought about it. They would chalk it up to like, oh, he just got the wind knocked out of him or something pretty innocuous. But as my football career progressed, the awareness around it really improved. I never had a concussion, but I've seen a lot of players get really banged up, and it's frightening. So in my career, watching all the players advocate for themselves, you see there's no more targeting, and seeing that change just in my career was really, really good, and I think we'll see the benefits of that for many years to come.
Liz, you spent your entire career working in worker advocacy, and for a lot of the audience, they don't even think of athletes as workers.
Right.
Entertainment is different from work.
Mm-hmm.
But in 2022, the AFL-CIO founded the Sports Council, of which the NFL Players Association and the National Women's Soccer League are founding members. What moved you to do that at the AFL-CIO, and what are some of the accomplishments that have come out of that?
Absolutely. Well, it's an honor to be on the stage with you, Charles, and of course with Jessica and Carl. Just as a reminder, the AFL-CIO is an umbrella organization of 63 unions, nearly 15 million workers. And many of our members, of course, are employed in jobs all across the economy that you would think of, but some of them play sports. Establishing a sports council within the labor movement, there's so much we have in common. No matter what kind of work you do, you want to show up and be safe and have safety and health protections. You want to have pay and decency and respect and a voice on the job. No matter if you're a minor leaguer that's playing, or someone who gets paid a lot of money to play sports, or if you're the security guard at the stadium, or someone who's working behind the concession counter. It takes all of us to make that ecosystem work. And so we like to say, work connects us all, really, because someone else's work makes your work possible. And, this notion of building a community within the labor movement to, provide that space for athletes was really important, because there is, these universal issues that really connect people together. But I think that the best thing that I've seen happen out of the Sports Council of the AFL-CIO is really athletes standing up for workers who are struggling in other industries. And I'll use one quick example. Super Bowl comes around, everybody's eyes are on that Super Bowl, right? And there was a group of bakery workers in Los Angeles a few years ago who were struggling with getting a contract. They were making Carvel ice cream cakes.
I love those.
I do too. And they were asking for $1 more an hour. And these were mainly women of color, who had been working at this company for nearly 20 years on average. The line, I think, was going so fast, they were speeding it up, and they said, if we're gonna be working harder, shouldn't we be making a little more, right? They were in contract negotiations nowheresville. And so what we did is the NFLPA came together with the bakery workers, and we had an event with these ice cream cake workers and football players standing together to say, there's no justice here, right? You can do better. And sure enough, after we left that event, the company called and they went back to the table and settled the contract like 2 days later. So that's the power of solidarity.
I love any story that has an ice cream cake in it.
Happy to provide it.
Jessica, because these players are workers, their relationship with the team, management, the league, really important. How do you help to facilitate that and make sure that that relationship, it works for everyone?
Thank you, and echo everyone's sentiment. It's a pleasure to be here with you all and to share the stage. So I'm the commissioner of the National Women's Soccer League, and interestingly, my background is that I'm actually a labor lawyer. I've always represented professional sports leagues. That's literally the only thing I've ever done in collective bargaining. So have negotiated collective bargaining agreements in the sports space really since 2002 on behalf of the NFL, on behalf of Major League Baseball, the NBA, ultimately now, most recently, on behalf of the National Women's Soccer League with the NWSLPA, which is a member of the AFL-CIO. I think the sports industry, and I'm imagining most people in this room aren't necessarily in the sports industry. Just for a minute of context, our business, unlike so many other businesses, is really rooted in the relationship that exists between management and labor. And in fact, we couldn't do all of the things that everyone gets to enjoy as fans without the basic terms of a CBA being in place that is negotiated through these CBAs. The most important thing is actually that you can show up transparently with integrity, be professional and respectful, try to understand each other's perspectives, and figure out what is the most important problem to solve for yourself and for your counterparty, and craft solutions around that. And so that's pretty much what I've done my entire career. And most recently, I've had the good fortune of being able to do that on behalf of these incredible female athletes, which has been the honor of my career.
Staying on those athletes, you mentioned the collective bargaining agreement. You just established a historic one for the National Women's Soccer League. Talk to us about what was part of that agreement and why that helped to make those players' lives better.
The most important thing that I could do in my role is, on behalf of these players, to make women's sports, and the National Women's Soccer League in particular, a viable, thriving business. That is the most important thing that I can do. And luckily, we have an incredible partnership with the National Women's Soccer League Players Association. For the most part, we have alignment around a long-term vision to create a league that is really the best league in the world. As we say, not the best women's league, not the best women's soccer league, but literally the best league in the world. And in order to, thank you. Yes. And in order to do that, we have to build it together. It has to be in partnership. We have to look at the pie as not finite. And that's the spirit in which we approached our Players Association. And we negotiated a very player-centric agreement that has the best conditions for maternal health and for childcare. We like to say, like, supporting women and mothers is not a social impact issue for us. It's literally our business. Our players are mothers, literally. Our players are childbearing, and they need solutions to be able to continue to play during the years that their career matters most and be able to have children. Like, none of us have to want to make these choices, and it's certainly a lot easier for me to have children and continue to work than it is to be a professional athlete. That was a key priority for all of us, raising our minimum salary, raising the salary cap to be able to grow in a revenue sharing function as our revenues grow. And probably the most meaningful one for those of you who follow sports, hopefully many of you follow women's sports in the NWSL, but I'm sure you're all familiar with the concept of a draft and an entry draft. And we are the first professional sports league in America to eliminate the draft and to make all of our players full free agents.
That was amazing.
And that really was centered around this idea of giving players agency, as we call it, lowercase a agency around where they play when they're not under contract.
Megan Burke, who leads the NWSLPA, Tori Huster, their president, they had a negotiating team and a very engaged membership, a very strong union to be a partner, to sit across that table and negotiate with you. And I think that makes a big difference.
We always want a formidable, smart leader at the union. It does not help us to be on the other side of the table with someone who isn't smart or savvy. And we love when the constituents actually show up, because then you actually know that you're negotiating with people who have authority to negotiate with you. So it makes it so much easier when you have that kind of buy-in on the union side. And that was part of the key to us getting the deal done, for sure.
It was groundbreaking.
Carl, your personal story. So you came out in 2021, it's 2 years before you retired. What was that experience like for you in the league, and how did people respond?
I tell people all the time I was very lucky. I feel that I was a benefactor of a lot of people in the gay community that came before me and fought for our rights and really paved the way for people like me to do the job that they love. So my experience was great. I had the best reactions from my teammates, my friends, coaches, fans, everybody. It's like the best thing. So I'm very, very thankful. And when I came out, I incorporated the Trevor Project into my announcement, because I wanted to get them in front of, clap it up for the Trevor Project. I wanted to get their mission in front of people who probably never heard of them, you know what I mean, in front of sports fans that probably haven't heard of a LGBTQ organization that helps at-risk youth. These kids need people to advocate for them. They need to feel that they're not other. And I joined the board of the Trevor Project late last year, which has been a really rewarding experience so far. And now more than ever, gay organizations do need a lot of support. Now more than ever, they need foundational support. They need individual contributions. And it just kind of feels full circle to be up here talking about how lucky I am for people that have fought for employee rights, for gay rights, for all these different things. So I just want to be like, thank you. You know what I mean? This is very, very nice.
Did you recognize immediately there were some things about the league as an advocate for yourself and for other players that might need to change to be more inclusive of more identities in the NFL?
I do think that there's an opportunity for improvement for high school sports and college sports. I do think that it's not where people go to work, right? So they don't have employee rights, you know what I mean? And so it's not where they go to earn their paycheck to feed their family. So there isn't that kind of respect. And I think that if we put a little more effort into that pipeline for not just male sports, but female sports, everything, then you'll see a lot more gay athletes in the future. And that's something that I think would be super positive.
Liz, since the AFL-CIO represents so many workers, so many industries, what are some of the things that are super specific to sports and athletes that are not like other workers that you end up encountering?
Yeah, and I was just thinking, as you were talking about collective bargaining, I just wonder how many people even know these days what collective bargaining is, right? I think it's, people have a vague sense of unions and employers sitting across the table negotiating a contract, but the notion of a collective bargaining agreement is that contract that gives you the freedom to do what you do best, which is your job, and to be able to thrive in that environment. So whether you're an athlete or someone who makes ice cream cakes, or someone who's in construction, or is a professional scientist, or a scientist or a teacher. We want to be able to have a seat at the table, a voice, to be able to raise things that might be going wrong on the job that you fear speaking out around, because in this environment, mostly people get retaliated against. And so having a union and a collective bargaining agreement provides a process for you to actually be your best self on the job. And so I think about that with players, because you think about things like player surfaces. I know that's been a big issue across sports, and it is a safety issue, and it's something that we take very seriously in terms of negotiating protections in the contract. Things like you mentioned maternity leave. I think too about reporting protocols when the league went through its crisis with sexual harassment. You think about players feeling like they had nowhere to turn, right? Well, now you've been able to negotiate something in your agreement that says, you know what, here's what happens. Here's what you do. Here's who you talk to, right? And how that gets adjudicated. And it's very transparent. And then finally, I'll just end on equal pay, because that's really what started the Sports Council and the AFL-CIO. Is I saw the U.S. Women's National Team out in front, and the equal pay issue being so prevalent, and the athletes having such a powerful platform to talk about equal pay. But the labor movement have been fighting for equal pay since our inception. And so the ability for us to come together and uplift an issue that is so central to every working woman in this country. You can clap for that. Because we still aren't paid equally in the year 2025. But we think collective bargaining can be a tool that could be more widespread and utilized across industries, because it ends up being a win-win for the employers and the workers. Because when you have workers who are showing up and able to be their best selves doing their jobs, they're more productive. Yep. And the return on investment is higher. So we think that more unions, of course, is the answer. Yeah.
Carl, one of the things you're passionate about is financial literacy for players. Why is that so important for you as a topic?
I have been very passionate about this for a long time. I work with the nation's leading provider of financial wellness tools to everyday Americans, Financial Finesse, understanding compounding and being a young investor and what that can do for your career and your life, and setting yourself up for generational wealth and generational opportunities. And when it comes to, there's a lot of talk about the bargaining. What really hurts the NFL players over the years and just history is that most of the players were never in a financial position to sit out. You know what I mean? They needed that new paycheck. So that's just like a very superficial layer that we were talking about earlier. But it is very short-lived, the average NFL career, and the opportunity is so big. The onus is on the individual to get educated, make good decisions, understand that life is long, and retirement comes a lot quicker than you think.
On the other side of that, how does a league deal with financial literacy and helping players to navigate the money that they're getting and how they have a longer life? Not just a career which may be short, as Carl said, but a life that is supported by the money they make.
Yeah, well, actually really excited about a program that we rolled out in 2024 called Beyond the Field, where we take players who raise their hand and say, yes, we want to learn more about how to be more well-rounded while we are still playing, to seize this opportunity while we are in the limelight. And as you know, once you retire, the opportunities that are thrown in front of you become things that you have to seek out. Not that they aren't there anymore, but while you are an active player, and I advocated for so much of this with our NHL players when I was at the National Hockey League, which is to try to help players to understand, yes, your bandwidth is limited because you are a professional athlete, and literally anyone in the world would take a meeting with you today. You could call the CEO of any company. You could meet with senators. You could meet with mayors. You could meet with governors. Take advantage of the opportunity you have. But by the way, it also helps you while you are playing. It helps you speak to media. It helps you get endorsement deals from sponsors. It helps you in so many ways to develop your leadership skills in the locker room, to make you more resilient, to make you more confident. And so we've taken these players and actually brought together all of our sponsors to say, hey, can you help us curate a curriculum that will basically enhance the lives of our players? And so one of our partners, who's a financial services partner, Ally Bank, is helping us and has delivered for those players a curriculum around investment, around how to manage your money. Finally, now our players actually have money to manage, which is exciting. Just 4 short years ago, 5 years ago, I think our players were making like $5,000 a year, which is insane. And they all had side jobs and were very distracted. I'm sure you remember those days
No more side
before.
hustles.
No more side hustles. Yeah, that's what I walked into. It was like, okay, we have some work to do here. But yeah, I mean, I really think it's just our responsibility, candidly, as a professional sports league, to leverage the power of our partners to enhance the lives of our players while they are still playing. And because these resources did not exist 5 years ago, we've actually made an intentional effort to outreach to our former players who really built this league but didn't have the opportunity to play in it while it was an actual business that generated revenue that could actually pay them a livable wage. And so we're in the process of building that out and bringing our partners along on the journey.
Liz, now that the NIL agreements are able to be entered into by people in college, even high school, what is the unionization prospects for people, for those groups of people, young people, possibly high school?
Yeah, I think there is a conversation to be had about what a model looks like for the future that puts workers at the center, that they can end up having agency and, you know, some voice and control in that process, because I think Carl said it was sort of like the Wild West. And we think, gosh, the model of collective bargaining could really apply here. You know, if you could have a consortium of players that really took the power into their own hands, right? And be able to have their own voice and their own standing. I don't know what that looks like for the future, right? And all I know is that being in a union gives you a place for collective action.
Right.
We're in the business of collective action. And I know the NFL Players Association has done an incredible job, you know, using that scale to negotiate better benefits for their players, and other athletes organizations do as well. But you know, the labor movement's been in this collective action business a long time. You think about 100 years ago when workers were trying to find training to access the skills that they needed in whatever industry they were in. The unions, the guilds, you know, professionalized that work and was a place where workers could go and they could trust that they weren't, you know, in a predatory environment that someone was trying to play them. You know, it's more like, no, these are workers. This is us, right? So whether it's training and upskilling, whether it's collecting your pension monies and amassing that and investing it at scale so that you can influence the economy. I think there's just a limitless potential for the way new models could be created, you know, as these industries are evolving.
Carl, you are also in tech business. You founded Raise, an app that connects nonprofits, businesses, donors, and volunteers more efficiently. What inspired you in that space?
Yeah, Raise is the best. Raise is my baby. And I was volunteering one day and I realized that, you know, giving back to your community needs to be a lot more easy and quick and without friction. And so when I was playing with the Buccaneers, I kind of first thought about the idea. That was about 5 years ago. And then kind of snowballed into this ecosystem to where I learned more about the philanthropy industry as a whole. I think for the nonprofit people in here, everybody understands that finding new donors, new volunteers, individuals is as difficult as it's ever been. We really need to support our local nonprofits, and so I wanted to make that process as easy as possible. We now incorporate corporate giving. Corporations only account for 6% of all donations to nonprofits, and so we need to get that number way. People think that it's 75%. It's actually only 6%. And you mentioned something about like after after your sport career is over. I do feel very blessed that I do have a next chapter, and it's been very, very exciting.
So if I have $100,
yeah,
I want to give it to somewhere where it'll make an impact. How does Raise help me do that?
Yeah, so what's really good for the individual, we really put the individual first. On Raise, you can donate to, I think, 1.8 million nonprofits. We have over 80,000 volunteering opportunities. You can get, if your company's onboarded, you get them to match it. We just instituted your own personal donor advised fund called the Raise Wallet, to where you can put money, let it grow, for all those finance people out there. So the benefit of it is, for the individual, you make all your donations from one place, and then when tax season comes around, you can export all your donations in an email, send it to your accountant. There it is, and it makes it very, very easy to get involved quickly, but do it in a savvy way financially.
I'm downloading Raise.
You guys go download it.
As soon as I get on this stage.
Yeah.
RAYZ.
It is RAYZE.
Yes, RAYZE. Go volunteer. And also give to the Trevor Project. Yeah.
Liz, I wanted to ask you how tech plays a role in your organizing. I can imagine it plays a huge role, but tell us about that.
Yeah, well, we use a lot of tech tools ourselves to actually organize and really democratize the use of technology for people on the ground who want to form unions. I mean, just you and a coworker is all it takes, right, in your workplace. And so we have a tool called Action Builder that we use that's mobily driven, that enables people to kind of, map out their work sites and who their coworkers are that they can join together with. Our laws are so broken now, our labor laws, it takes a real act of courage to form a union, because often people are fired when they try to form a union. It's sometimes a very high risk proposition. And so tech tools are enablers, and technology can be used for good, but it can also be used for evil, right? This notion of algorithmic management that we're seeing in some workplaces to monitor every second of a worker's environment, or predictive analytics that are actually instituting forms of discrimination. And so we think that tech needs guardrails, and that unions can actually be, and our collective bargaining, be a vehicle for making sure workers have a voice in how technology is used in the workplace. But also we can use technology for good to enable and help lift up the power of workers to join together and form unions.
So Jessica, your season is starting again. How has the league and player advocacy grown since you've been at the helm?
I think for the first time, female athletes in this country finally can be supported the way men have been for so long, to be able to train and play in professional work environments and actually perform at their best. And imagine a world where that is the case for future generations. What we're seeing today, and what is now taking the world by storm with women's hockey and women's soccer and women's basketball and women's golf, this is the product of an entire generation of these athletes training and playing in environments that you wouldn't send your children to go and train or play in, and they're still that good. Imagine 10, 15 years from now, where we finally now have the investment and the resources for these players to be able to thrive as professional athletes, the platform they will have, if they choose to use it, to be able to advocate for even more change beyond what they do just by kicking a ball, is what I'm so excited about, and hopefully my children will get to enjoy.
Great. While we're on that such high note of what could happen in the future, Liz and Carl, do either of you have something you see coming in the future that you're really excited about in the world of player advocacy?
I am excited about women's sports, where it's going, and the women athletes who have stepped up and taken enormous risks and shown such strength to make it succeed. And I just see the activism on the rise. They're willing to speak out. And from a worker perspective, I think about the solidarity that women athletes have shown in particular to workers all across the economy. And 9 in 10 young people under the age of 30 support unions. That's recent polling. It's a high of 60 years. The popularity of unions is really surging. And so I see these women athletes, especially in the next generation, being strong union members, getting out there, speaking their truth, and doing it unabashedly, and they're unafraid. And so that gives me great hope.
Great.
Yeah.
I mean, to echo that, I've been somebody who's been a beneficiary of immense allyship, and leaving the NFL, I saw the growth of women being employed at major roles. Right? It's really, really important that women have allies, and that it's not just them fighting for their rights. It's male coaches, players having respect for their careers, for their acumen and for their talents. So that's what really excites me.
Let's give our guests a big round of applause.
Good job.